Washington's offense had its best day yet in Tuesday's practice.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Lars, we had a great day out there on the field at Tuesday's practice. We're going to talk about the defense because they are going to be able to create turnovers, man, like we talked about yesterday. We're going to talk about Giles Jackson because it feels like he is in line for a very, very big year. But we got to start with the opener because Washington's offense, after really being pretty smothered by the defense for the last couple of days, responded in jest. I've got touchdowns galore all over my notebook here. And it's really, I don't want to say it's encouraging because we knew that the defense is, it's usually a little further ahead to start camp like this, but seeing the offense respond like this is very, very nice to see.
Well, it's exactly what we expect, right? When you think about, okay, the defense is going to have some good days, the offense will have, it's exactly what you want in fall camp where you have a little bit of ebb and flow. Because if, the only time that I can recall covering Washington where the defense straight up dominated was 2016. And obviously we know how that season turned out for the offense, but that is a very much an outlier type of camp where, okay, if the defense is consistently forcing picks and the offense isn't doing anything, really, you don't really want to see that. And I think it's kind of a good early indication because now you're wrapping up week 1 of camp. This is day 6. So loosely they have the day off tomorrow on Wednesday. So loosely the first week of camp, you'd say what, a 4-3, 3-3 deciding today on Tuesday, which one ever gets the lead. And the point is, well, I take away the first 2 practices because they were basically walkthroughs, if we're being honest. So in reality, you're still talking about, 2 wins for the defense, 2 wins for the offense, and you can kind of figure out the rest from there, which is exactly what you want to see. Now, again, I know we're going to talk about some of the highlights and some of the lowlights, but I think as we start to get into camp a little bit more, you're seeing some of the freshman mistakes come into play, which is, I guess, expected to be, right? I think it's not right. It's not something that, for everybody that wanted Damon Williams to win the job, again, we both professed that on the show where we could see how Damon could win the job. But the problem is, if Damon wins the job as a true freshman over a 5th year in Will Rogers, that's a little bit of an indication as maybe a cause for concern. So it's why you want to have the freshman making the mistakes now and still learn from them.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into some of that a little bit later when we talk about the defense, because the defense did a really, really nice job against Demond. But we got to start with Will Rogers, because one thing you said there, with him as a 5th-year senior, Will made arguably the best play we've seen at camp so far. He rolled out to his left, and he had Alfonso Tupatala at kind of in a decision-making point here where he's supposed to be in man coverage on Kaliki Latu. And, he had to make a decision. Is he going to stay in coverage or is he going to come after Will? And he decided to come after Will and try to, get the sack and get the play blown dead. And Will did a really nice job just kind of flipping it up and over the top to Kaliki Latu, who scored, I believe I have it here, as like a 6 or a 7-yard touchdown. But it was just one of those really nice plays where it's, that's what a 5th-year senior can do. You see that, you don't panic, you take your time, and, you just dump it over the top to your 6'7" tight end, which is nice. And it's not saying that, Demond can't do something like that, because he absolutely can. We've seen him thrive out of structure. He made a couple really nice plays today out of structure, but having Will, who has all that experience under his belt, and in his final year of eligibility, you want to make sure that in your first year in the Big Ten, you have somebody who can make sure that, it's a little bit more steady, where Demond's highs are going to be higher than Will's in his college career. That's something that I feel isn't that much of a stretch to say in terms of especially his rushing ability. But the lows right off the bat are going to be what any freshman's lows are. They're going to be tough. And that's okay, because that's part of the learning curve of college football. Because a lot of times you can say the same thing about the NFL as well. And again, that's okay. But one of the other big things that, we need to get to is after he missed most of Monday's practice, was limited and working off to the side, Denzel Boston came back on Tuesday, and he certainly looked a lot more like himself. It seemed like he might have been dealing with a little bit of an injury as he worked with some of the guys who were dealing with some lower body stuff. And it was nice to see where, he hasn't looked like his dominant self just yet that we saw in the spring, but he really looked a lot more like himself. He's running crisper routes. And, after no Denzel and no Rashid at Monday's practice, he just adds so much to this offense. And it's so much more noticeable when he's out there. Where, I mean, yeah, that's a super obvious thing to say, of course, but when you have a starting three, and we're going to get into some Giles Jackson stuff a little bit later, but when you have Giles out there, you have Jeremiah Hunter, who continues to just look so reliable, which is so nice to see. Plus Denzel out there, it's going to put a lot of stress on defenses this fall. And
then you added in the tight ends with Latu and Quentin Moore. And I think that's the important thing when you talk about the type of quarterback that Will Rogers is. He knows how to find the release valves. And so when we're talking about not having Denzel out there for a day or two, or maybe not being at exactly the bar that we set for him, and even that he sets for himself, we know what Denzel is going to do. Where there's no concern of a sophomore slump or things like that with Denzel. But it's almost imperative to find those other valves and those other options in camp at this point in time, so that when Denzel does come back and does, get into full form, you already know what you have with Denzel. There's no, oh, hey, now we have Denzel, now we can start to go back to this. You're trying to find other guys like Audric Harris and your Giles and several other players in different roles. As to say, okay, what if we take out Denzel for a player or two? And we saw that with last year with Rome, where they took out Rome intentionally, where it's like, hey, when Rome's not out there, can you guys figure out how to get open? And, at some point, Rome is going to leave the program, whether it's this year, next year, 2 years from now, whatever. You have to be able to have those guys in the bank. And so I think getting those banked reps early on in practice and early on in fall camp especially is going to be good for Will, because we're going to start to look back at the end of September and say, okay, now those routes to Kevin Green and those routes to Audric Harris and Rashid, Rashid wasn't there on Monday, but the point being, when Rashid's out there, he's getting those reps as well. And so we'll start to see that come into fruition, because we already know, I think, what Jeremiah Hunter is going to be. And I think that is another side of this, where when Denzel is not out there, Jeremiah is eating. And I think that is the other side of this equation, that when you look back at what the receivers room is returning without Jeremiah, it looks a lot rougher than it does with Jeremiah. And so even with or without Denzel, it's an important piece to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry to cut you off there, because it's really funny. Like, as I was going back through my notes, it's like, Denzel certainly had a good day. He had a 2 touchdown day today, where it's like, it's funny because it wasn't just as noticeable as it was in the spring, where he's making, super acrobatic, super highlight reel catches every single day, where one of the touchdowns came in 7-on-7s from Will Rogers, 20-yard score, as I have listed here. And then the other one was a really nice 25-yard score, where he caught just like a little drag route underneath and turns it upfield. And shout out to Giles Jackson. Again, we're going to get more into that in a sec, but shout out to Giles Jackson, where he did a fantastic job blocking for him and clearing the way. So Denzel just had a free path to the end zone, where he's still making plays and he's finding ways to do, more than just be a jump ball receiver, which is exactly why we're so high on him, because he can do so many other things. And it's just nice to see him making plays like that. Before we move on, I just want to get a couple other things out of this notebook here, where one of the nice ones was Cam Davis had a nice little touchdown in the red zone. And it seems like he's somebody who obviously we know is going to be really impactful in that area. And then just the more that I look at it, I'm just so excited about what this receiving core is going to be. And without getting into the Giles Jackson stuff, just Jeremiah Hunter is somebody who is going to make some really, really strong catches over the middle of the field, where, Giles can do it and Giles can get open, where he's been really shifty and really nice to watch. But Jeremiah is that guy who's going to go over the middle, and linebackers and safeties and cornerbacks are going to be coming down on him, trying to make a hit, and he's going to lay one on them as he makes the catch. We saw that at 1 or 2 different points today, where guys are trying to come down on him over the middle, and he is the one who is throwing the shoulder and making sure that he comes down with the football and fights for extra yards, which is really fun to see, as you pointed out, where, that guy adds so much to this room as well, which is really nice to see. And Lars, with that being said, Giles Jackson could be in for a career season in 2024. Which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, which was wonderful news. Is my good friend and I went to go watch the Mariners take on the Phillies on Saturday. We got our tickets on the Game Time app. It was super fast, super easy. We got them at a really nice discount because we did buy them so close to first pitch, which is thanks to their awesome last minute deals. You can save up to 6% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. They got zone deals. You can save even more when you choose a section to let Game Time choose the seats. They're all in pricing, where you toggle that feature and it shows the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. And with Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry, and you can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Lars, we've really loved what we've seen from Giles Jackson so far in fall camp. And today was just another example where one play that might have been my second favorite play of the day was Will Rogers rolled out to his right and found Giles, who was 10, 15 yards downfield, just kind of streaking across the field, looked like it was an in route. And he makes a nice play on the ball, and Vincent Holmes is coming down, and he looks like he's getting ready to lay a big hit because of the first day of full pads. Guys were juiced up. They wanted to tackle. They were amped up. They were ready to go. And Giles just made him whiff. He just completely whiffed on him, and Giles turns upfield on a dime and is gone. It's a 50-yard touchdown. Where seeing plays like that are really nice, but it's more than just that with what we're going to see from him this fall, because we're going to see him in roles where he's, starting inside and going out and up, where he's moving all over the formation. And if we see him utilized like Jacob Cowing or Dorian Singer was at Arizona with the other two guys, it's not going to be, a 90 catch season like Jacob Cowing had. It might not be 1,000-yard season like we've seen Dorian Singer have, but he's certainly going to have his best season of college football.
Oh, no doubt. And I think it goes back to what I said last segment when Rome was out there, when Rome wasn't out there last season, they had Giles at the X. And so the fact that Ryan Grubb and that offense can say, hey, even a shorter guy like Giles can get open. And I think it speaks to his skill set, where you look at, he's a quick, shifty guy, but he can catch it anywhere in the field. Now, his size would tell you, okay, maybe he's not the number one outside option, but I think there's things that you can do with his skill set to cut over the middle, make some of those mesh cuts, in cut routes over the middle, those 10 to 15 yarders that open up things for other guys, whether it be a Jeremiah, a Latu, Moore, whoever you want to pick. He's that guy that can either get open for you or create openness for somebody else. And I think when you look at the receivers, especially in that slot position, there's nobody else like that. Again, Rashid could be at some point down the line. Audric Harris could be some point down the line. Again, we're talking years down the line.
Right. I don't know. Like Keith Reynolds could fill that role really well. We saw Kevin Green making up a couple of nice catches today, where I feel like those are the guys that they're looking for to fit that mold. But I hear your point, or it doesn't feel like they're ready yet to do just that.
Yeah, although I do think Kevin Green probably is that next guy. I know we both like Keith, but I just think in terms of what he was able to do at Arizona, being in the scheme, I think he might have a slight edge in that regard. But neither one of them have the breakaway speed that Giles has. And I think when you talk about getting the ball in open space for a guy like Giles, that's where he eats the most. And whether it's, getting in that 5, 10, 15 yards and then up the field, or if you just have him on a go route like an a la John Ross back in the day. I don't think necessarily that's where they're going to have him as at the most, because they seem like they want him to have the ball in his hands already and then run, not run to the ball and look up. That's not necessarily his strength, but I do think it could become a strength of his. And I think when you looked at what he was doing last season, it almost was a build-up for all of the things that he can do in Jedd Fisch's offense, which we're starting to see in fall camp, but I still don't think he's probably, at 70% in terms of what we've seen Giles do, and that's being generous. I'm just saying, like, maybe 50, but between 50 and 70% of what we've seen Giles do in this offense, which still leaves a lot to be desired, but that's a good problem to have because Giles can still do plenty more in this offense.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that's really fun to think about when we think about this offense, where, we spent a whole lot of time on the defense over the last couple of days, because obviously the scheme there is just so brand new, just to the world of college football, truly, when you think about what the Steve Belichick thing is. And we talked about it so much on yesterday's show, all the Everdares know. And I think about, when I look at Giles, it's just somebody who has, over the course of his college career, found so many different ways to make plays and found so many different ways to get open. Like, as you said, when I think about the first Oregon game last year, who's the guy who caught the first touchdown? It was Giles, and he did it out of the X. He did it just kind of streaking down the field, where it's nice to know that you can utilize him in that role. But when you have two guys that are, anywhere between, I believe Jeremiah's listed 6'2", between 6'2" and 6'4", on the outside, it's, we don't need to use you out there. We'll find a different way for you to make an impact. And just having a guy who not only can do that, can be so clutch on the goal line, where on Monday, we saw him make a really nice back shoulder fade catch against Jordan Shaw. And he did it again today. He made a really nice catch again today against Jordan Shaw. I believe I have it listed here as it was a 25-yard touchdown from Will Rogers, where Jordan Shaw made a pick six that we're going to get to in the next segment, but Jordan Shaw had a pick six that he took off DeMond Williams for 100 yards with the entire defense running down there with him. And 2 plays later, Giles said, yeah, you beat me there. I'm coming back and I'm going to get you here. And just seeing those things from him is really nice, because that's one of the things you want to see out of a guy like that, where, we talk about some of the senior leadership you're going to need on this offense from Jeremiah, from Will, from Jonah Coleman and Cameron Davis, and Giles Jackson certainly needs to be included in that group.
No doubt. And I think it speaks to Giles. If you look back at his career, because we're talking about him having a career year, in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of obvious, because this is going to be his best year to see the most production on the field. When you look at what he did at Michigan, then what he did last year at Washington, didn't have a ton of opportunities to do it. And then he also got hurt and things like that. But he seems to be that ultimate football IQ mind, where I haven't necessarily had the ability or option to show it, but here's all the things that I can do. And I'm glad you mentioned that Jordan Shaw, because when he hit the brakes and spun back out like that, there's a change of direction that exists with Giles Jackson that I don't think we've seen in a long time. And that says a lot, because look at the guys last year. They also had pretty good change of direction. But the ability to, at the line, stop. When we're talking about, getting 5 yards in the end zone, stop, and then 180 that back out with no wasted motion. That's the other thing. There's a lot of guys when you look at receivers, like they're doing a lot of this, they're doing a lot of that. They're trying to, do this and that, trying to shake defenders up. Giles is already 3 steps ahead of where he wants to go. And I think having that injury last season almost allowed him to take a step back from football and say, okay, let me go study my game. Let me go study my game with Ryan Grubb, Jamarcus Shepard, and then now pairing him with Kevin Cummings. It's a match made in heaven, because Jamarcus and Kevin are 2 of the better receiver coaches in the country when it comes to college football. And they're not that different in terms of what they're asking Giles to do this season compared to what he was doing last season. He just now has basically everything has been pulled back from him. So now he can do whatever he wants. And I think we're starting to see that in fall camp. And there's just so many plays where obviously Giles is going to eat over the middle. But I think there's going to be routes where we see him lined up as a 2x2 outside, that he comes inside, and vice versa. Yep. Because he can do so many different things, you might even see Jeremiah lined up in the slot and then break outside. And so there's so many different mismatches that you can create with a guy like Giles that I think, and also, is there, aside from Zach Durfee, and maybe Maximus Degree, is there any other player that has been 3 or 4 years in college football who has had to wait his turn like Giles has, and then just knowing this perfectly tailored offense for him to just, to your point, will he get 1,000 yards? Maybe, maybe not. I could see him getting 8, probably 750, 800,
sure.
Like somewhere in that ballpark, 50 catches, 60, But the thing with Giles, and this is where the important thing to mention his career, he is a dependable option when throwing the ball. Might not get a ton of targets, might not get over 40 targets in his career, but he'll catch 35 of those 40 targets. And I think that, especially in this offense, when we're talking about get the ball out in space, get it in your playmaker's hands, and get up the field for Yak, that's Giles Jackson to a T.
Yeah. So one thing that makes me think of is last fall, when this show first started, we were talking about it a lot during fall camp last year. Giles was the primary target of one Austin Mack when he was working with the second team offense. And it would, whenever the play broke down, whenever Austin was just said, I need to make sure I get the ball out, I'm looking somewhere, he always looked for Giles Jackson. And, now Giles is also learning the new scheme, as is Will Rogers, but having that sort of guy where he knows, okay, I know Giles is going to find a way to be open right now, let me get him the football, is really great. And then coupled with one thing we also discussed on yesterday's show, Will's ability and want to get the ball out of his hands quickly, where yes, that's coached, but it's also clear that that's what Will Rogers wants to do. He wants to go through his progressions as quickly as he possibly can and get the ball out. And who is, perfect at getting open in short areas and finding ways to win very quickly and making sure he's open? It's Giles. All 3 of these guys can do it for sure. But who's the guy who's going to be closest to the line of scrimmage in terms of the 3 receivers, who's constantly going to working out of the slot? It's Giles.
Exactly. But the thing that it's worth highlighting, because we've said it a couple of times in the show, he's not just an exclusive slot receiver. I think that's the important thing to note here with Giles, because obviously when you look at his size at 5'9", 5'10", what is he, $185 at this point? Not the biggest guy, but he plays so much above his height. I think that was something the other staff also noted about him, where he might be listed, under 6 foot, but he very much can play above that 6'1" height that, Rashid has and some of these other guys have. And so I think when you start to look at his full repertoire, don't be fooled by the hype, because again, it's easy to pigeonhole Giles in the slot, but I don't think that's where he's going to have a lot of success. But I wouldn't be surprised if he has more success or equal success outside the numbers just as much as he has inside the hash.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I think about the, and I like bringing up, because it's something I was talking about with Christian Capel on the sideline today, where you bring up the Jacob Cowings, the Dorian Singers, the guys we've seen do this at Arizona, the guys we saw play that role and find ways to get open, whether, as you mentioned in the 2x2, where there's a rub route and whoever's behind him will kind of go out and up on a fade or something different towards the goal line. And there are so many different ways that you can find a way to scheme a guy like Giles open, where we're certainly going to see him, get some catches on wide receiver screens and different things like that, where you just get the ball into his hands and let him make a play. And that's going to be such a big part of this offense, especially as you continue to figure out the offensive line, where it certainly looked better today. And you saw it take a step in the right direction, which is really nice to see. And again, it just all comes back to a guy like Giles, where he can make so many different plays in this offense and help it go. And Lars, that being said, let's flip sides of the ball a little bit, like the defense did quite a few times today. So, Lars, we saw the defense create a couple of turnovers on Damon Williams. He threw 2 picks. One, as we mentioned, to Jordan Shaw, who took it the length of the field with every single person on the defense in tow blocking for him, where Damon might have been able to run him down, but with 70 blockers on the field, it felt like that was not going to happen. And then the other one was he was looking deep for Kevin Green. Leroy Bryant was in coverage. Damon made a nice throw over the top, but he didn't get a chance to look off Peyton Waters, who came over and made a really, really nice play. There were a couple others that were dropped. Drew Fowler dropped a pick. It looked like Thaddeus Dixon and Carson Bruner also had an opportunity to get their hands on one and didn't. And Damon made a fair amount of nice plays, but the guy who stood out the most to me on defense was Lance Holtzclaw, who we've been a huge fan of on the show for a while. I just want to make sure I have this correctly here as I look at, we got him for certainly 1 sack. He had a tackle for loss. He had what looked like a strip sack. And there was one where, the play might have been blown dead, where he could have had a second, which would have brought him to 3 total with the strip sack. And this defense is, as we talked about yesterday, has created a lot of deception and is going to find a way to create a fair amount of turnovers this season.
Exactly. When you talk about a guy like Lance, where he's not necessarily the most physically imposing, he's not 6'5", 240 as that type of an edge. He's a speed rusher. And so it's exactly what you want to see him do. Line him up in multiple different spots on the field. And we've seen their edges kind of line up in a few different spots, coming in on the ball, up the middle and off the edge. And so I think when you're talking about a guy like Lance, there's so many different things that he can do. But the one thing that also Lance, I think, might actually, they didn't get to show today because we're talking about strip sacks and tackles for loss, but he has the ability to drop back in coverage too. And I think that's what makes his game so sneaky, is knowing, okay, obviously we know Lance, if he's going to be lined up on the line, is going to be coming at us. But every now and then when he doesn't, I think that's what's starting to fool the offense even more is, wait, now if he's not rushing, who is rushing? And then you're throwing over the middle to Drew Fowler, and all the quarterbacks are just confused. And it's like, okay, wait, what's happening? This is exactly what we talked about with the defense on Monday's show, where you have so many different options to choose from, so many different types of edge rushers to go with. Everyone's going to find a way to eat. And it's the same thing I think about when you look at the NFL, where, for the Seahawks, you have Jeremiah Jones, Boye Mafe, the list goes on and on for it, and Leonard Williams, different types of edge rushers, but there might not be a guy that has clear and above double the snap counts, but everybody's going to have the production. And I think that's what Steve Belichick is going for, because if you were just to say, okay, Durfee and Lance are your 2 edges, and you're going to get 400 snaps each, that might be okay, but I don't think that's necessarily the recipe for success, especially when you talk about how deep that room is.
Yeah, I agree. It certainly isn't. Where, the 2 guys we got to talk to after practice today were Isaiah Ward and Voy Tanufi, where, listening to Voy, who's played inside, who's played outside, talked about being most comfortable on that interior role, which we've certainly seen him do a lot of this spring, where he's playing the 3 technique or he's playing the 4-eye, which he said, yeah, that's where I'm most comfortable, because that's where I played in high school. I've known it the longest, and I know I can be a really fluid mover in there. And another guy who, plays that same role as Lance, where it listed a similar weight, is Isaiah Ward, where there have been plenty of plays where, he's lining up on the end of the line as that 5th guy when they go to those big fronts, those 5-man fronts, and he's dropping off in coverage, or a different edge rusher is dropping off in coverage, where we've seen that for a while. Like we saw Braylon Trice do it. We've seen Zion Tupuola-Fatui do it. We've seen that in Pete Kwiatkowski defenses, but it's different now where, you know, I remember seeing Joe Tryon do it a whole bunch a few years ago when he was still around, where it was like, yeah, this works and you're able to do it. But having a guy who's a little bit lighter than Joe, where he moves so well for his size, I was always a big fan of his, but having guys who are a little bit lighter than that, who, you know, you look at him and say, oh yeah, that guy's always been a speed rusher. I know I'm going to have to worry about him off the edge. And all of a sudden he takes a hard step and he's dropping back. That's one of the things that we've seen create some confusion from quarterbacks where it's, oh, where's the pressure coming from now? And all of a sudden we've seen Brian Parham or Alfonso Tupatala or Carson Bruner as a blitzing linebacker on the other side. All of a sudden they're the ones who's getting a free rush because it confuses the offensive line. It confuses the quarterback and they're not able to change the protection. And those are the sort of things that are going to force defenses into mistakes this fall.
Exactly. And it's all about confusion. And I think that's why you have so many different types of edge rushers, because you don't want to just have a bunch of guys who can you don't want to have, I mean, as much as we like Deshaun Lynch and Zach Dorothy and guys like that, you need guys who can do more than just set the edge in the run game. You need guys who can do a little bit of both. But when you talk about Zion, and we both love Zion, there was kind of a ceiling to his game that I'm not sure Isaiah or Lance has. And I say that with all due respect. When you start to look at what those guys have been able to do in fall camp, and especially Ward, I think of the two, I know we both are big fans of Lance, but just Isaiah Ward is so natural far out at nickel as an edge. Just to me, it's like there's so many things that he can do where Lance almost is like a old-fashioned outside-inside linebacker where he's not as big as you would think. And Ward's honestly not as much bigger as in terms of comparing the two. But he just plays more confident. And I think part of that becomes, you know, with the relationship with Jason Kafusi, he knows exactly what Kafusi's doing. But on the flip side, you're not seeing Lance get that confidence. And Lance is not shy about being confident. I think that's we both.
Oh, absolutely.
There's one thing to know about Lance. It's not that he's not confident, but I think he's getting more and more confident in the scheme with each practice.
I agree, because that was something I asked Jason Kafusi about. And one of the things that he said was, yeah, you know, there was something where we needed to make sure that he was playing free and that he was focusing on the fundamentals a little bit, because we know what he loves to do. And we want to make sure that we put him in the best position to succeed. But we wanted to make sure that he was honing in on exactly what his job was in the scheme. And today he looked like a fantastic pass rusher. He looked like the best one on the field at times, which was exactly what I feel like his ceiling is. Where I don't know if I agree when you talk about, you know, his ceiling not being what Zion's was, because yeah, we saw what Zion was in that COVID year, but it obviously, you know, in the years following, it didn't feel like that was what teams wanted to play him as. You know, that 280-pound guy who's going to set the edge, but can also be a really nice power rusher. Where with Lance, he's got the athleticism, and because his frame can certainly hold 25 more pounds from just from just what he looks like, that as he continues to grow in that role and he can become more of an edge setter and develops more of a pass rush bag, that he can be that guy. And I'm not saying by any stretch that he's going to be an All-American, because that's just so subjective. There's so many different things that come into effect there. But one guy who I certainly think can have that ceiling was a guy we mentioned a little bit earlier, where he had a nice pick, and that's Peyton Waters. And you and I were on this show touting Peyton Waters in the spring, saying, you know, if I had to pick one guy in the back end who's going to burn his red shirt, it's going to be him. I'm ready to pull that back, and it's not because of Peyton. It's because of the guys they brought in, where Tristan Dunn's been out there. He's been still working, where he wasn't in full pads with everybody else today. He was still in a half shell, and certainly looks like he's working his way back. I know Vinny Sunsera is really high on what he's able to do, but you think about Cam Broussard, you think about Justin Harrington, Cam Fabiculan, Mikel Esteen, you think about that deep room, and Peyton made a fantastic play today, and he's continued to do so throughout the fall, and he did a lot of that in the spring as well. But when I watch him, I just say, yeah, that ceiling is there. But it feels like one of the reasons that this coaching staff went and got 2 veteran safeties was so that you didn't have to worry about throwing a freshman into the rotation, and you can still put him out here when need be. And you can find different spots where you say, yeah, we want to make sure we get him some game action. We can still take advantage of those 4 or 5 of the bowl games that you can get him into. But as of right now, we can be a little bit more patient with his development, because he's certainly come a long way since the spring.
I don't disagree with that. I do think it would still not surprise me if he played more than 5 games, because he could get time on special teams and kind of work his way, and that be his maybe his first year in football, playing more so on special teams, so that when he comes in next spring and next fall, he's already got that game speed up. Whereas if you get 4 games on defense, it's like what we saw with Jordan Shaw in Indiana last season. Okay, we like what you can kind of do. There's some stuff there, but we might need a little bit more. That's why we're still seeing Dyson and Jordan Shaw compete for that nickel spot. But I think Peyton's going to find a way to play more than 5 games. I'm with you, where it's going to be harder now with Broussard. But the other thing with you mentioned Harrington, it's not like Harrington's been a full go since he's been at Washington. So I think there's going to be a path for at least one safety to shine in that freshman group. And I think from what we've seen of the guys that have shown out, Peyton's going to be that guy. The question is it 5 games, 6 games, 7 games? Because I don't think it's going to be like 8, 9, 10, 11. He's not going to get a full season. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's up in that 7, 8 category when you look at maybe 3 or 4 games on special, 3 or 4 games in the secondary, 4 or 5 games on special teams, and then you marry the two together next year. Because one thing that we always know about college football, where's the best place to start? It's on special teams. And when you look at a guy, especially at safety with his size, he's a perfect gunner.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes it really tough, where I think they're going to pick their spots and they're going to say, yeah, we're still going to have you dress for every game. We're going to have you do this. But on these games, we know we want to use you. You're just going to be a full go. We're going to see it on a whole bunch of snaps. We're going to get you in the rotation. But on some of these other games, we're just not going to put you on the field at all. And the old Chris Peterson, like, yeah, no, you're not seeing a single snap sort of thing, where it's not going to be, we're going to see special teams here, defense here. It's going to be an all or nothing sort of thing, in my opinion, at least. And Lars, with that being said, thank you as always being here. Thank you for all the everydayers for tuning in. And, thank you for making Locked On Huskies your first listen of the day. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast, from NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors. Our guy, Spencer McLaughlin, gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. And you can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And also make sure to check out the Locked On Huskies Insider Program. We're dropping a whole bunch of new interviews that we've done. We got an exclusive insider-only Q&A coming soon. We got so much fun stuff over there. You get a free 2-week trial, and after that, it's $4.99 a month. And we're doing our best to make sure it is the best possible way to make sure, just the best possible use of that money, because we really do appreciate all your support. And that's something you're interested in. The link is also down in the description below. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. If that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. And if you got any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you are the only, please leave us 5-star reviews. Those help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.